Okay, very good. So welcome to this online discussion about partnerships and employment services. My name is Miguel Peromingo, and I will be hosting this event together with Eamonn Davern. We're having this discussion because delivery models of employment services are changing. They're changing constantly, but now in the times of pandemic and post-pandemic and the effects it will have on the labor market, they're going to change even more. And we see that the discussions around delivery models very often focus a lot on which end of the spectrum will the delivery model be? Will it be more towards more public service, or will it be more towards private outsourcing, privatization? And in reality, it's none of the two extremes. It's neither fully privatized, no, it's fully public. Efficient and effective labor market programs and employment services are usually delivered in partnerships. So it's somewhere in a kind of more complex setting of different partners working together, often after the management of a public service, but not always. And we just wanted to invite you and discuss with you about delivery models and partnerships that are already happening, that are working, and discuss with you what, from your point of view, is working well and what can be improved in the future. You're coming from different parts, different partners from different partnerships of employment services. Let me just say who is here. We have Julian Hiebl, who is the head of international affairs in the public employment service in Austria, Arbeitsmarktservice. Julian, can you just raise your hand so that, yeah, there you are. His colleague beside him is Marius Wilk, who is head of unit Bureau of Board of Directors, also in the Austrian Public Employment Service. We have Niall, your second name will be difficult, or Muircheartaigh, probably.
It's Muircheartaigh in English. That's easier.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. I lived in Ireland for a while, but I didn't learn Gaelic, unfortunately. So Niall is from, he works for the Ireland Department of Social Protection and deals with contracted public employment services. And then we have Ania Mendrek. Ania Mendrek works for Maximus, one of the biggest private employment services in the world, originated in the United States. Ania is the director of Maximus in the United Kingdom. We have Wim van Ammel, who is the manager of I-Diverso. I-Diverso is a consultancy department of work experience companies, a non-governmental organization in Belgium, in Flanders, to be more precise. And we have Esther Jimenez, Montes, who is coordinator in the area of employment and entrepreneurship in a Spanish foundation called Santa María de la Real. It's known for profit for regional development in Castilla y León. That's a region in Spain where Salamanca is, for example. So welcome, all of you. Thank you for joining this discussion. I'm hosting this discussion, as I said, with my colleague Eamonn Davern. We're both consultants and experts in employment services, working both for public employment service for a long time. Now we're freelancers. We have, I think, together 40 years of experience in working in this field. Eamonn is an author of a recently published paper for the European PES network that deals with this topic of today, partnerships in employment services and how to manage them. And I would like to pass the word to Eamonn in a moment. He will be speaking or putting a little bit of context to this event about partnership development, which elaboration of different employment service delivery models are there. So a little bit of a classification, if you want. And then we'll also tap into technological innovation and partnership development of the future of work, which touches upon the pandemic, but also the future of work and digitization of the labor market that was already ongoing before the pandemic kicked in is now maybe accelerated or changed, but that's a development that we have been working on for a while already. And then we will have the possibility to discuss with all of you. We will have some questions for you, and you are welcome to ask questions as well, give you comments on this topic. So yes, without further ado, I'll like to invite Eamonn to present.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to see lots of familiar faces. The study was an output from a working group organised by the EU Public Employment Service Network. It was, I think, the third examination of partnerships in the last decade. There were previous studies in, I think, 2011 and 2015. I think one finding from the study was that the growth of partnerships, and indeed the increasing development of partnerships, is probably due to a number of factors. For various reasons connected with the labour market that all colleagues will be very familiar with, there's been an increasing need to activate more and more people because of the increasing skills demands of the labour market, particularly in Europe and indeed other parts of the world as well. There's been a strange kind of dichotomy between an increasing need for highly skilled people and labour shortages in many sectors, at the same time combined with persistent and continuing long-term unemployment, which is a paradox and a very, very challenging problem. There's been a lot of European policy development seeking to address this issue. We've had the passage of the long-term unemployment recommendation, the active inclusion recommendation in recent years, and of course looking at younger job seekers, the youth guarantee. And there has been an increasing requirement to try and get more discouraged job seekers and inactive people registered with public employment services and becoming active job seekers. But indeed, many of the people who are inactive or long-term unemployed do have a number of wider kind of issues which often need to be addressed before it can be a realistic prospect for them to be considered able to be fully active job seekers. And we've had, I think, a lot of pressures on public employment services from growing customer expectations, increased political demands, and sometimes some difficulties in actually realising the resources to increase capacity. So employment services have been in the situation of being perhaps required to try and produce more to a high quality with less inputs, which of course is very, very challenging. And of course, bringing it forward to where we are now, we've of course had COVID. I think most of the research and literature so far has described COVID as probably fast forwarding 4 or 5 years change into 5 or 6 months. And lots of pre-existing trends appear to have been fast tracked as a consequence of the pandemic to enable adjustments and for service delivery to continue. There is a risk that COVID will be making some of the people most vulnerable to labour market exclusion even more potentially at risk from that, and the long-term scarring effects of inactivity and long-term unemployment. At the same time, we have an incredible increase in digitalisation, all of the agendas to do with what we now describe as the fourth industrial revolution, incredible potential from use of big data, more data-driven organizations, the incredibly potential from artificial intelligence, and I think echoing Miguel's opening comments, all of this in a way which was probably one of the most significant conclusions from the colleagues from many public employment services who worked in the partnership study, was that probably the previous sometimes distinction between different delivery partners, public and private, in a sense becomes increasingly irrelevant. All of the partners have a very important and continuing role to play, and the technology is a way of bridging the gaps, potentially putting many of the clients in a more powerful position, so more customer choice and input, which is a good thing, but also there are lots and lots of potential issues which need to be resolved to ensure that partnerships can work to their best effect and that all of the different stakeholders are able to move forward in an increasingly collaborative and cooperative way. So the partnership study, in summary, identified that a culture of cooperation will probably need to continue, and for that to happen, there needs to perhaps be a certain attitude amongst partners. A positive environment and commitment was one of the factors identified as being a component of successful partnerships. It was found to be very difficult to actually list when a partnership was working well or what made it work particularly successfully, but a key factor appeared to be the right kind of dynamics and the right attitude and mindset from all of the partners and shared objectives. So leading on from that, many of the participants were of the view that people needed to actively think about cultivating their working skills to enable them to operate successfully in an environment where they're not only engaging with colleagues from their own organisation, but working across organisational and sector boundaries and trying to, when they're in a partnership environment, assume a role as part of a new collective entity, which is different to their own organisation, but they are still at the same time representing their own organisation's interests in a partnership context. There are many, as I think colleagues will be keenly aware and probably have had some experience of working around the array of legal and institutional issues which need to be resolved to enable a partnership to continue to develop and operate fruitfully and successfully. The view from all of the public employment services was that PES will always need to operate with partners. I think, as Miguel said, I think PES have always done so. I don't think there's ever been a time when public employment services have ever worked totally in isolation. Of course, they've always needed to work and wanted to work collectively with providers of other services. Some employment services have vocational training in-house. Others actually commission this through working with people from other organisations. And of course, employers and job seekers themselves are perhaps the two most crucial partners of a public employment service when we take the most broad view of a partnership. And PES have always worked in partnership with those two groups, which since they were originally established. Rather than having a set of fixed rules, the working group were very much of the opinion that what was summarised as an a la carte approach was needed. Partnerships will need to evolve. The world is always changing. At the moment, it seems to be changing even more quickly than was the case previously. And so PES needs to adopt a very kind of dynamic and kind of flexible approach to delivering partnerships. As we'll discover again in more detail shortly, technology offers incredible potential for much more effective and rapid communication between stakeholders, real-time input with job-seeking clients and employers, and the ability to harvest much more information much more quickly to build a fuller picture of the situation of clients we're working with. Good governance, I think, doesn't need any further elaboration, but it's absolutely essential. And an area that perhaps always needs to be re-examined and explored in more detail is what are the metrics that are necessary to measure successful partnership delivery. We have now very well tried and tested measures of public employment service effectiveness, the effectiveness of delivery partners, public employment services, contract providers, and people, NGOs working through ESF all have a large suite of performance measures which are attracted to their contracts and arrangements, but specific measures which are particularly focused on assessing how well a partnership is working in terms of managing these relationships are less well established. And perhaps finally for this slide, partnerships need to evolve organically. The group considered, should partnerships be time bound? And the view was that a partnership, as long as it's continuing to add value, will need to continue but always evolve. And there will be a time when a partnership has outlived its usefulness. It may have actually resolved all of the problems it was established to originally address, or perhaps there needs to be a new discussion about the orientation of a partnership, but partnerships need to evolve. Moving on to the next slide, please, Miguel. Okay, in terms of the context for partnership delivery, the group came up with a typology of 4 specific sorts of partnerships. Of course, models are always to an extent abstractions and are never kind of precisely applied in the real world. But we looked at a very large number of partnerships from a number of European member states, and we found that most of them, to an extent, could be framed within one of these 4 different partnership typologies. Very briefly, we described agile partnerships, where a group of partners came together to work in the classic agile format. Of course, there is a agile methodology that you may be familiar with. It's about a way of working without a preconceived grand plan, but adapting very quickly to meet a certain kind of goal. Agile partnerships are often working under some quite intense time restrictions. They need to deliver something quite quickly, and they can often work in a slightly informal way with a group of partners learning through doing. And we had a very good example of a partnership in Lithuania where a group of municipal, educational and employment service partners were given a commission by government to introduce a one-stop approach for engaging with some particularly young job seekers at very short notice. And they decided that what they would do was, apart from focusing on a political mandate, not have a detail about the way they operated, apart from having a view they needed to come up with their proposals and implement them in a pilot rather quickly. Subcontracted relationships will be very familiar to, I think, all of us. They are classically, but not exclusively, often based on commercial contracts. They will be normally, or I think they must be, negotiated in advance between the agent, the principal commissioner, who is in this context often the PES, but sometimes a Ministry of Employment or a parent organisation, and a third-party supplier. And they are subject to some very formalised and clearly defined outputs with quality standards, audit requirements, and frequent reviews built into the contract, and often payments linked to delivering certain specific contracted outputs to particular standards. There is a great degree of interest in all of the literature and around the whole kind of study of organisational theory at the moment about the idea of co-construction partnerships. This is about really a partnership which is partly defined with the input and perspective of the end beneficiaries in some regards. And the idea is that this can start to put the client interest or the customer interest very, very much at the forefront of partnership development. And during the working group, we had a fascinating input from Actris, which is the public employment service for the Brussels city region of Belgium, where they are involved heavily in the design and delivery of social impact bonds. And one of the social impact bonds they described was looking at the reintegration into the labour market of particularly ex-offenders, and some of the potential investors who were putting money up into the schemes, which would only pay a return, of course, if the partnerships were successful, were of course very heavily involved in the design of the programs, which of course is very logical, because if an investor is going to put money into a scheme, they would really welcome the opportunity to have the best opportunity to define the scheme in a way they think will work to try and ensure their return on investment. And finally, we discussed supportive partnerships. In this regard, they were seen as a classic network, and we had a very, very interesting presentation from a network which the German Public Employment Service are very active members of, which is a long-standing cooperation in Germany to increase awareness of gender-neutral activities in the labour market and breaking down and removing gender stereotyping across the whole employment sector, whether it's in kind of job design, job advertising, training programs, and the expectations of young people in terms of which kind of occupations they decide to pursue. And the key point of supportive partnerships was they are very much a information exchange network where partners can, to an extent, kind of engage to a greater and lesser extent based on their needs at a particular time. And what they are committed to doing is an open kind of sharing of information. So all of the participating organisations agree to share information on their different input into the agenda on a very, very good and lively interactive website, which is now building up into a massive repository of information on gender neutral approaches to labour market activity in Germany. Moving on perhaps to the final slide, if I may. Thank you, Miguel. I think perhaps one of the most interesting developments is the whole agenda of how technological change is driving the future public employment service, or indeed wider employment service ecosystem. I don't think we discussed the employment service ecosystem 5 years ago, and now it is being discussed all the time. All of the literature, both within Europe and globally, is now mentioning the ecosystem. And I think this re-emphasizes Miguel's opening observations that this is really moving beyond the previous and often unhelpful debate about public and private and whether or not there should be a particular kind of eventual direction one way or another, but an expectation from all of the experts involved, people such as your good selves and your organizations, that the successful way to take maximum advantage of all of the potential liberating benefits from technology is by thinking about an ecosystem. And this is all about enhancing cooperation. Interestingly, my very good colleague and friend Julian, involved in this discussion this afternoon, and I were discussing only about 3 hours ago this morning new work on the Public Employment Service vision, and that is all about for the EU enhancing cooperation. Technology can have a number of potential benefits and implications for partnership working. Of course, it's absolutely changing the way the labour market works. We have the increasing growth of the so-called gig economy and platform employment. Technology can be used increasingly for digital mediation. There is a particularly good example from Flanders that no doubt Wim will be familiar with, where VDAB, the Flemish PES, are now involved in real-time tracking clients' reintegration journeys, and clients can post updates on their reintegration situation in real time, and an advisor with VDAB can provide a real-time response and adapt very quickly to a changing situation from a job seeker, with analysis of things like the click behavior of a job seeker to look at where their job search is moving in a more successful direction. The changing nature of work is now the idea that the traditional job for life is increasingly disappearing as a concept, and people will be involved in increasing career transitions. And the role of employment services, private providers, and our NGO colleagues is increasingly about getting people to be best equipped for dealing with frequent career changes which will be necessary during a working life, rather than finding one job for them, which could be their job for a decade or several decades. AI is increasing the whole nature of labour market relations, not only automating many jobs and perhaps changing the structure of the labour market in terms of employment, it is also offering incredible insights into how we can perhaps do more to analyse people's position on the labour market and decide how partnerships can work in concert to try and assist a job seeker. And of course, big data is enabling us to build up a much richer and fuller picture of a client's whole kind of situation and what things need to be addressed to improve their chances of a match and finding a job. So we've moved into really this area of transitional labour markets. I think a concept many of you or all of you will be familiar with, but this is really, again, breaking down perhaps the idea that we were going to be matching somebody into one job for good. It's about frequent changes in the labour market, and the whole indeed idea of perhaps what it means to be employed and unemployed is moving away from traditional division. Certainly with the gig economy and platform work, there is a whole new kind of dynamic in terms of the way some people are employed. And indeed, from a wider perspective, I think individual countries and indeed the European Union are facing a challenge in terms of the fact that employment law was often devised for a very different world, and we're now looking at a kind of very different way of working, and employment legislation is based on very pre-IT view of the labour market and the economy. All of this is leading to a very, very different approach in terms of the way customers are engaging with public employment services, and perhaps customers are expecting a different and more slick and advanced service, and PES need to be indeed even more flexible in providing upskilling opportunities for people to ensure they do not get left behind with increasing labour market changes. And finally, all of the EU policy development, I'm particularly here thinking about the social pillar. When I was with the Commission, we looked at the domains of the social pillar, and many of them had a clear kind of intercept with the whole agenda of employment service work and what employment service and partners can do to try and enhance the employability of people in a changing environment. So thank you very much for your attention. I do hope that's helped to partly set the scene. And I'll now hand back to Miguel, who will then kind of introduce the next session. And I think Miguel and I would be particularly fascinated to hear your observations on some of the above. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks a lot, Eamonn, for setting the context. I'll do a round of questions. Shall we start with the Austrian Public Employment Service?
Indeed, yes, indeed. So I think first of all, we'd particularly like to ask, well, Marius, perhaps assisted by Julian, if they've got any kind of observations on what they think are perhaps the really important aspects of the way PES need to work to ensure they can get commitment from partners. AMS, the Austrian PES, has a very long history of successful working with partners, particularly in the provision of vocational educational training. And I think we'd very much welcome input from our Austrian colleagues on any observations they might like to share with us on how they've managed to build up this strong track record of working with partners to assist in a situation where Austria has got one of the best reputations, I think, in Europe for its training provision. So perhaps, Marius, over to you, if we may.
Okay, thank you. I think you have to have in mind that in Austria we have an old tradition of partnership, and even if you have it in the focus also the construction of the whole public employment service, then you see, even if you're looking at this from an aspect of the legal construction of the employment service, that there involved many partners in the organizations. For example, not only on the federal level, our administrative board is a tripartite institution with a strong involvement of the organizations of, on the one hand, of unions, but on the other hand, also of employers. And we have this structure also on the province level, for example, and even on the local level. So we have in our mind that it's necessary to have cooperation, especially, and this is also a connection, that we have, our model is that, for example, doing professional qualification, we have our subcontractors, and we're giving contracts to other institutions for education and upskilling our unemployed, for example. And there we have also the connection that you can say, for example, that our biggest training institutions for adult professional educations are closely linked again to the social partners, for example. So we have a long tradition in cooperation with these partners. Nowadays, we have a strict system of contracting out and giving tenders, for example, but also we are very much interested in feedbacks from these institutions, and we are one, I would say, we are one of the biggest, or you can say the biggest contractor for professional adult education in Austria. And from this we have for many years very stable cooperation with these training institutions, and we have also established some forms of cooperation and regularly also to get some feedbacks from these institutions. They're coming with ideas what you can do new, for example, to us, and then we see if it's possible or not. Sometimes we have to take up an idea, for example, and then making a tender with then there is also the chance for other providers to do a special course. So there's a very close cooperation, especially in the field of qualification, but not also only in the field of qualification, but also, for example, we have the tradition for special groups of unemployed, groups who need special services, special counseling and things like that. We say it makes no sense if we try for these specialized services to develop for every targets groups. For example, we develop for all targets groups these specialized service, but we buy them also by out-contracting. So it's another field in Austria that we have many contractors who are giving specialized service for unemployed with special needs, for example. So also this is one line of our activities, and we always have to decide, for example, if there's a need for offering new services, if we're doing it from ourselves, or if it makes more sense, for example, to buy them from the market. And in addition, one example I have to say, now in the times of short-time work, it was so much that it was not possible to do all the work in our organization. And for example, we bought for the administration of the short-term works. Also, we did it in a way of outcontracted into private consultants, for example, to help us in a certain phase where we had such a lot of work to do in connection with short-term work, that it was only possible to do this in the form that private consultants helped us to handle the workload, for example. It's not a model for the future, because we're hoping that the amount of short-term work will decrease in the next month. But we also had from our tradition, even in the core field, for example, of what we are doing, that in a certain phases, it was very helpful to have our partners on the market. We cooperated with them. And so it's a really broad spectrum where we cooperate with other partners on the market. In an old tradition, and I think it's a clever way of doing it, handling your problems in a form of cooperation between partners and ourselves. Okay, next.
Thank you. That was very, very interesting, Marius. Thank you very much for that. I think a couple of...
There's nothing much to add, actually. So as Marius highlighted, the question is, what is the setting of the public employment services? And as we all know, every country is a bit different, so it's difficult also to compare in terms of partnerships. For us, the setting is, as Marius explained, we have a big involvement of the social partners. So for us, it's very natural to steer and do the strategic work. Basically, all what we do together with the two or three social partner organizations. On the other hand, we also have cooperations with temp work agencies, so private employment services. But this is a cooperation, I would say that's a more market-driven cooperation, because we consider them our biggest customers, actually. So they help us to fill the vacancies in a very effective way. On the other hand, we also have cooperation in terms of, I would say, research and more academic-driven actions that we are doing. Just to give you one example, we have initiated in 2009, I think, a project, no, it was in 2009, a project Digital New Skills, where we gathered researchers, social partners again, and employers from several sectors in workshops investigating in the future skills needs. And the latest edition or iteration that we did was in 2019, when we started a new one. It's called New Digital Skills. So we were concretely focusing on the digital skills needs and to receive the view of both the academic field and the researching and the let's say the real world where it takes place, of the employers and the employees representation, and to identify sector-wise which skills will be needed. So that's also a kind of a cooperation that you could consider. So at the end, when you reflect in our views on where cooperation takes place, I think we can say and all the levels, at all levels, we do cooperation. And again, as Marius highlighted, our two tasks, and the first one is the administration of unemployment benefits, but on the second, let's say, pillar, provision of active labor market policies, we are completely, let's say, not dependent, but we completely rely on the work and the cooperation with private institutions, training institutions, because we cannot do this as an institution. So we are not a training fund, as, for example, other PES are. I think Le Forum, for example, in France, in the French-speaking Walloon region, they provide trainings themselves, but we have not the capacity and not the institutional setting to do this. Yeah.
Thank you, Beth. I think that was a really extremely helpful and rich kind of description, and it very nicely addressed the issue about the partner commitment in Austria. I think, to very, very briefly summarize, I think you very helpfully mentioned that the social partnership framework is very useful and provides a very good institutional setting to enable that to develop. Marius mentioned very helpfully about feedback And clearly in Austria, the partners feel they've got the ability to kind of actively comment and feed into the whole discussion, debate and design, which is extremely helpful from their perspective. And I'm sure that helps to build their commitment as well. And again, both Marius and Julian mentioned there is a long tradition built up over a long degree of time. So there is a strong track record of fruitful cooperation between partners and the Public Employment Service. So partners understand and know they have a particular role. And clearly, again, finally, from both our Austrian colleagues, they mentioned the flexibility and the fact that there were some quick responses recently to some of the problems from COVID. And so partners understand that they will potentially be called on for their expertise to be kind of taken advantage of. So it provides a very positive kind of context from a partner perspective. I think this moves very nicely onto a question that we'd like to ask our colleague Niall from Ireland. Ireland, again, similar to Austria, actually has a very long and positive tradition of social partnership working. What they have been involved in for a number of years now is a partnership in terms of commercial contracts with private welfare to work providers, and perhaps reflecting on that, and if there's time, some of the wider social partnerships. I'd like to ask Niall if he could give us any insight into how he thinks there is evidence of the benefits for job seekers from partnership working, and how these arrangements can be seen to be effective or have been proven to be effective from all of the many different partnerships that DSP, the Irish PES, has with other organisations. So thank you, Niall. Over to you.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly, yeah, thank you.
Interesting you mentioned social partners. Throughout the 90s and early 2000s, social partnerships were pretty strong here, but they've fallen out of fashion with the Great Recession from 2008 onwards. So I mean, unilateral things were done, like we had the Troika in, the ECB demanding a cut in minimum wage, and unilateral pay cuts in the public service. So I think social partnership has never really returned in the same format. So you don't hear as much about social partnership in government circles, or as much as you used to. So in terms of our own system, what I deal with is very narrow. It's just on employment services, and specifically employment services to the long-term unemployed, people on the live register for longer than 12 months. And we're entirely dependent on partnerships for those services. The state just deals with people who are unemployed for 12 months or less. And so we rely entirely on non-profits and for-profit organizations that we have contracts with. And in terms of the four partnership models, it's pretty decisive. We use the subcontracting partnership, which would be pretty formal and contractual in nature. And there's a quote in the report that says, about it, outputs tend to be developed through linear processes. Management of subcontracted partnerships tend to focus on negotiation process and tools, and that really describes what we're doing. So of the two types, the for-profit and non-profit, it's a good time because we recently had consultants in doing a review of all our services, and within our unit we actually visited every single non-profit in the state. I think there might be 50 or 60. We're divided into a few different teams. Late 2019, early 2020, we visited every single one, and it's fascinating to see the variety. There's organizations that deal with people with disabilities and their employment challenges that are actually corporate social responsibility organizations, and then there are jobs clubs which provide kind of short interventions in terms of CV, interview preparation, and so forth, that are part of the trade union movement. So there's a huge variety of organizations out there, and they all kind of evolved organically. The bigger ones from the 1990s, they were kind of bottom-up community organizations that were tackling employment black spots. And one of the legacies that we're dealing with that now is that the network is patchy. It's not statewide. But I think this was particularly exposed about 10, 11 years ago, when unemployment grew from 4.5% to 15 to 16% very, very quickly. And our non-profit organizations just didn't have the capacity and our internal organizations never had the capacity because they've never dealt with long-term employment services. So very quickly we had to contract a new service that we call JobPath, and we had 2 main contractors there, and those contracts are still running. They've been extended twice, the latest one just to cover the COVID period. So I mean, there's pluses and minuses to both of them. The non-profits are very flexible. They've grown to quite large organizations by Irish standards. They deal with social inclusion, rural development, community creches, community employment schemes. They deal with former prisoners. And they probably would have been supportive model originally, but they've kind of evolved into a subcontracted model. And but these new for-profit organizations that we've engaged with since, I suppose the process began 2011, 2012, since 2014, they've addressed the lack of capacity and flexibility in the nonprofit sector. And that has made our processes more formal, more contractual. You know, it's very clear in these meetings, they're probably less partnershipy and, you know, very, very much kind of, this is the government and we're talking to subcontractors. It's not that we just give them instructions. There is plenty of dialogue, but it is very the subcontract process. But the plus side of that is we're seeing very interesting things in terms of digital services capacity that we wouldn't necessarily have seen with the nonprofits because of the limited resources. In terms of the job seeker's perspective, that can be difficult sometimes. We're a very centralized state in finding out what their perspective is. We do annual surveys for the for-profit service, the JobPath service. The great thing about recently beginning a relationship with the for-profit sector from scratch is that you can design everything the way you want. So you can get the metrics exactly the way you want, in a way that you can't with the non-profits because they're actually patched into our own IT systems, and the way we can't internally because the difficulty in changing government IT systems, you know, just to tweak them on an annual basis to get new metrics and see what the employment rates are, or you know, just to get the stats you want to measure progress. So in terms of measuring the job seeker's perspective, we have the annual surveys, we've inspection complaints units within the department. We did an econometric review with the OECD input, which showed that employment outcomes with JobPath were improved by 20% and average earnings increased by 16%. And there was an interesting project with the INOU, that's the Irish National Organisation of Unemployment, completed in late 2019, that measured people's experiences. I suppose we nearly put more store in non-profit looking at this, because when the government goes looking at job seekers' experiences, because it's the same agency that does social welfare payments and employment services, people are a little concerned, sometimes even scared, that the same agencies that's asking them about their experience of employment services is also in charge of their welfare payment, and you know, they're in fear that their payment may be stopped or threatened if they criticize government services. So I would put plenty of value on a kind of third-party non-profit approach to examining experiences. So I suppose their experience was they had communications issues. What service were they attending? What were their obligations for the service? Is this a departmental service? Is it private? Is it public? There was a little bit of confusion there. There was, excuse me, I suppose that we also had to deal with the challenges, perceptions, the client's perceptions of what they were supposed to do. Were they being forced to do it? What were their expectations? And also what we have to deal with here is mass media's expectations. There's a bit of a dichotomy in the way that that the services are displayed, and I'm sure other countries have seen this, that the for-profit one, which is community-based, kind of bottom-up organization that's evolved over decades, is seen very favorably both in political and in the mass media, whereas the for-profit one, which emerged in the last crisis and is just not viewed, it's viewed as like, the products aren't judged on the same merits. You know, the profit motive seems to override any people's view of things. I don't know if Eamonn, is that the kind of thing you were looking for?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. It's very interesting background. So thank you. No, it's useful context, and that's useful for our kind of broader discussion shortly. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
I mean, that leads on very nicely to the next input from my colleague Ania, but I think very briefly there, I mean, I think you very helpfully mentioned that there is a clear role in terms of meeting the job seeker need through increasing capacity. I think, as was touched on by Marius and Julian as well, there may well be, for institutional and resource reasons, a requirement for capacity to be sought from other organisations. And you mentioned that one of the ways of really trying to evidence the benefit that job seekers can obtain from working with a partnership or through a partnership, whether it's public or private, is some kind of fairly solid and tested performance metrics, which can be there to assess the kind of outcomes that have been delivered. And perhaps finally as well, the perspective of the client, the service end user, so to speak, is very, very important in that regard. And perhaps one final additional point, actually, the whole issue of IT and the ability or inability of IT systems to be compatible has been one of the really big issues addressed by public employment services for years, actually, in terms of attempting to ensure a successful and seamless operation, and also audit and review the results. I think that moves very nicely on to our colleague Ania from Maximus, which has been involved, I mean, globally in addressing some of these issues for many, many years now. And we'd particularly like to ask Ania if she could share any observations with us in kind of how perhaps a provider, a partner, particularly a private provider, what they need to do in order to deal with the different institutional frameworks that they are working within. Because there are partnership models, as we saw from the report, and they can all look very nice as a kind of interesting abstract. But in terms of the practicalities and the real kind of on the ground reality, what does a provider need to do to try and ensure that it can meet its own obligations, but also deal with all of the institutional arrangements which vary from country to country, and indeed in some parts of Europe they vary from region to region. So over to you, Ania. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eamonn. January the 20th, 2020, Maximus opened its first door to job seekers in Italy, in Milan, in Lombardy. And a few weeks later, I was on the last flight out of Milan to London before the airports closed. And we were hit with the pandemic just a few weeks into our operations in Italy. My work focuses on working with our government clients, our future government clients, and community organizations and potential partners in promoting partnership in employment services. And I'd like to share with you 3 points that I really hope will contribute to our discussion on partnerships in employment services, particularly what we've learned in our most recent operations. To start with, it's important to have a really clear policy objectives. What is the program, what is the policy intended to achieve? Then it's to have a clear design and the implementation, and finally, a clear oversight and evaluation of the operational delivery and flexibility to make significant changes when it's necessary. Let me start with the first point. Maximus operates 2 programs in Lombardy, Italy. Dotto Unica Lavoro for those who are over the age of 30, and Youth Guarantee, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with, for people under the age of 30. Both programs share the same policy objectives. It's to support job seekers in re-entering labor market, sustaining employment, or rejoining further education. Both also emphasize user choice principle. They're open to both public and private and non-public providers. And both in their design assume that the policies will address the challenges of ever-changing labor market, the needs of job seekers, the skills gap, and of course, changing the needs of employers. However, that's where the similarities between the 2 programs end. And for us, in order to successfully deliver the program, we had to adopt 2 different approaches. In Youth Guarantee in Lombardy, we could actively outreach to as many young job seekers and engage with them as our capacity allows. We are able to invest in innovative solutions, deploy tools and technology that would allow us to meet the needs of the young job seekers, the community partners, and of course, the needs of employers. And we do it at a scale. And we have been able to do that in the midst of the pandemic. We were the only operator and provider, including the public administration, that was operational throughout the entire time of the lockdown. And we moved all our activities, including job fairs and engagement with employers, online. In Dosa Unica Lavoro, the regional program intended to support those over the age of 30, we had to assume a different approach. The program budget ceiling for any new operator gave us a very limited ability and opportunity to engage with job seekers. With a small budget allocation, and that's regardless of the capacity of the provider, we were only able to reach out to a small number of job seekers. So in order to support those who come through the door, those who have heard of us, we worked very closely with other providers, including the local public employment services. And we offered our capacity to support their job seekers. And I think on paper and by description, it sounds like a great idea, very collaborative approach, but from our experience, it has got some unintended consequences. Collaboration between partners is great, but when it's forced through poor design, it adds layers of complexity and really blurs the lines of accountability. It also, in our view, gives providers, regardless who they are, this sort of opportunity to cherry pick who they want to support, who are the job seekers that will give them the best opportunity to find and sustain employment. And it creates confusion. The job seekers who are referred to us by other providers come with pre-designed, pre-arranged employment path, which as per their regulations and the rules cannot be changed. So in essence, the providers who have the capacity to support them are almost hands of those who cannot. And therefore, it sort of puts a veil on who really is doing the work and what quality of work is being delivered. And I think those 2 examples kind of stop providers from adding value to partnership. On the other hand, at Maximus, we have a bias to action. We have to be agile. We always have to be ready to adapt to new situation. And I think our relevance really relies on the ability to provide quality provision, quality service that our government clients see the need for. And in the last 12 months, the first 12 months of our operations in Italy during the pandemic, despite all those challenges that the different arrangements of the 2 different programs sort of imposed on us, we were able to open 6 offices, hire 30 fantastically talented new staff, and reach out to neighboring Emilia-Romagna with our operational delivery. And I think the value that I believe that we're adding through the work, apart from the direct delivery, working with job seekers, working with community organizations, working with all the other partners that we see around is also a continuous dialogue with our government partners, exchange of practices, exchange of the challenges that we're facing, trying to work out the best possible solutions in given circumstances. And I think that's something that we see more and more of, that everybody, regardless whether they are a public institution, a not-profit organization, temporary work agency who we work with, or providers like Maximus, are very much open to a dialogue and a discussion, because I think you know, it is a bit of a cliche, but I'm not afraid to repeat it. We can't be working in silos anymore. We really have to work together. And I think the pandemic has, as Eamonn, you mentioned, sort of fast forwarded and kind of forced everybody to rethink how we work together and what value each of us can add to those who really need the support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was extremely interesting and very informative. Thank you, Ania. I think there, again, thinking about the targeting agenda, some very, very helpful observations there. Partnerships, whether they are between public and NGOs, public or privates, or between different government organisations who, of course, have to work in partnership as well on a day-to-day basis. They need clear objectives. They need a clear design about what's needing to be achieved, and there needs to be some kind of evaluation mechanism so that we can reflect on what works well and what doesn't work so well, particularly when we're looking at targeting often long-term unemployed people, where we really always need to be considering how much resource can be placed in terms of prioritizing different groups to get the desired outcomes. Clearly, poorly designed projects will lead to very suboptimal or sometimes very, very wasteful bad targeting, which fails to meet the needs of the most priority vulnerable job seekers. Part of that is ensuring that there is very clear accountability. And again, Ania made the very good point that everybody needs to know exactly what their role is. A feature of partnerships is they are often delivered through some fairly lengthy and sometimes complex supply chains. The whole issue of technology, which was touched on at the end there, is opening a fascinating kind of approach where we're perhaps even moving away from a very linear delivery to one involving lots and lots of different inputs, often in parallel at the same time, presenting some very interesting challenges in how we deliver services to meet the needs of job seekers. And of course, the classic problem that has been around forever, actually, irrespective of whether any organisation is public, private, voluntary, or any agglomeration of those, is to try and avoid cherry picking or creaming and parking. I think in every sphere of life, in any kind of delivery organisation, there would always be a pressure for people to go towards a quick win rather than a more difficult one. And we need to build in some kind of processes to avoid that without over managing a partnership to such an extent it prevents people doing their day job. So there is a fine balance to be struck between a sufficient steer and umbrella to ensure people do what we want them to do, without defining things so tightly that they are able to think or innovate at all. So that's very helpful. Thank you. Moves on, I think, to our next question I'd like to ask our colleague, Wim from Flanders. Very briefly, came across Wim's organisation when I was looking after a long-term unemployment project for the European Social Fund, and was very, very grateful to come across Wim's operation in Flanders, because one of the most compelling problems faced when you're looking at reintegrating long-term unemployed people is that employers will want the best match they can, and of course employers will have a if they've got a choice, which they normally have in a labour market, particularly one at the moment where we are perhaps moving into the post-COVID situation, hopefully, but there will be a lot of restructuring and employers will be in a position to perhaps choosing more than has been the case hitherto, which people they want to recruit. How can you persuade employers to recruit people who have got perhaps a slightly patchy or very patchy work history, or maybe some background of social problems, which can present some red flags to employers who may be worried about engaging with them? And Wim's organisation have a track record of actually managing to work with some of the more or most marginalised job seekers in Flanders and successfully integrate them into sustained permanent employment, which is quite a considerable achievement, and one that is not perhaps always that widespread. So I'd like to ask Wim if he could share perhaps with us briefly what he and his organisation have done to enable employers to have confidence in recruiting people who are not at face value always people who might be seen as the most positive prospects for the future. So Wim, thank you. Over to you. I think you're on mute there, Wim. Thank you.
Still after a year, still missing. Okay, well, my organization, Web Work Experience Companies, has three pillars. First, we are a social employer, offering for more than 350 vulnerable employees in social restaurants, repair shops, etc. After that, the second part is also a training and guiding services for vulnerable job seekers. And the third pillar is also a service for employers, where we collaborate with more than 1,500 companies within the region of the Kempen, in the northern part of Belgium, in Flanders. And I will be talking of that perspective from I-Diverso, in which we collaborate with employers. So how can you successfully engage the potential employer with to go and work with the LTU? Well, I think first it starts with internal actions within your company itself, because the LTU is not a very appealing product service, so you have to make your colleagues proud. You have to create some kind of customer service focus, very quality and driven demand, and you have to make your colleagues proud of the relevance of the importance of their work that they are doing. Also look into the mirror, because we as often as a subcontractor of our Flemish BES, or often we do projects of European Social Fund. Look into the mirror. Always make the reflection: does a project, does a tender fit into strategy and objective of your company? So that will create authenticity within your company. So also you can make people proud of them. And also what we did was we create a new structure and we create a new brand, because we've been working with the Vulnerable Targets Group for about, we founded in 1992. And Web, our mother company, was a very strong brand within the region, but also had the connotation of working with weak targets, grouped, etc. So especially for our experience that we want to bring to the companies, we create a new team, a new brand, we create a new house style, a new logo, we make a new website, etc. And we called it I-Diverso. So we took the experience of working with LTU for more than 25 years. We brand it a bit differently, and we make it a team, we make it as a service, as I-Diverso, in which we go out and meet the employers, etc. Just in case, the I stands for inclusion and innovation, and Diverso stands for diversity. So that was the first part, the internal part, but also you have to translate that externally. So our colleagues has a strong external focus on the customer, because the LTU is our client, but the company is our customer, in which we work very demand orientated, and we go in dialogue with them, and we try to find what needs they have, what fears do they have when they want to engage themselves to in working with LTU. So we are not pushing the LTU within the company. No, we are just asking what barriers do you have, and we try to solve them for them. We are not afraid of sharing our knowledge with them. So we give them what we know, what we think is best for them, how they can work, what they can do on their work floor, etc., etc. So that's also very important. I think over the years, we have a very strong partnership also with the employers' organizations. So the Chamber of Commerce, etc. We work with them, and yeah, we let them know we are dealing with diversity and with inclusion, so they can create visibility towards the individual companies for us. Also, what we think it's very important that we can make our employers assured that we support them during the employment and even afterwards. So don't drop the LTU at the door and run away, but provide job and language coaching during the first period of integration. We have a proactive approach. We stay in touch with the employer, etc., etc. Also here in Flanders, we have a lot of incentives also from the government, from financial incentives when employees give jobs to LTU. But we make also sure that's not the reason why they do it, because it's only the financial part. It's tricky part. So it's not the only reason why a company can do it. And last but not least, an external action was also for us to create visibility throughout social media and interact with our companies, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc. And especially during Corona times, the social media was very important. Not only social media, but the last year during Corona we had to make a shift towards much more companies which are growing despite of Corona. I think of food supply, delivery, healthcare, etc. And not the traditional like cleaning, home cleaning services, restaurants, etc. So we had to make a switch during Corona of sector, and also developed some kind of supporting product towards employers, because employers told us that a lot of employees were struggling with Corona and with Corona measurements, and had an impact on their social well-being, etc. So we can offer them some, we call it Corona coaching. So for people who have employees who are struggling with in these times, and also the online services. I think Ania already told that it was very important to make a switch from the face-to-face interaction towards online dialogue, even though it was and it's still very hard for those target groups to get online. So when we get in touch, the first thing what we do and we make what we try to do is try to reduce the digital gap in order to get started with the guidance throughout WhatsApp, throughout MS Teams, etc., etc. So yeah, that's how we deal with it now.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Perhaps just for 1 minute, I should add something that there was not, unfortunately, time to discuss this afternoon, but something that could be very interesting in the future. The practice of job carving, which many of you may be familiar with, and there's some quite interesting reports that have been produced now by the European Union. And WIM's organisation offer a very, very good service for employers where they send very qualified, skilled people to examine an organisation and see if there is the scope to redistribute work, perhaps from some of the less skilled functions from the more perhaps highly paid skilled employees, and provide new kind of jobs which perhaps may be able to meet the needs of people being referred who have limited perhaps work capability but can do a very good role in an admin function. And WIM's organisation have shown employers how they can actually achieve a more profitable and productive outcome through taking long-term unemployed people on through some organisational reform, which is fascinating. And I commend any of the studies for you, which are very good reading. I think to summarise though there, in terms of how partners can engage with employers, some very many important points there. I think Wim emphasised the idea of open and honest dialogue, sharing with your employer partners, the whole concept of being visible as far as possible, being ready to move quite quickly to meet changes in the labour market and engage with new and changing employment sectors, and the idea of having a positive brand. So partnerships are normally constituted from a group of organisations. Partnerships then have a name and an objective, and perhaps partnerships also need to ensure that they invest strongly in branding what the partnership is doing to improve the recognition and attract custom from the primary customers, in this case the employers we are seeking to attract to recruit long-term unemployed people. I'd now like to move on to our kind of final input in terms of this part of the discussion, where I'd like to bring Esther into the conversation. Had a great pleasure again from the Long-Term Unemployment Project to visit Madrid and visit Esther's organisation and meet some of the clients who have been involved in something called the Launching Pad initiative. I very much commend it to you again if you've got time to read some of the reports at your leisure. A fascinating project which is thinking of partnerships. We mentioned at the start different typologies. It's very, very much driven by individual clients developing their own reintegration programs, and with a degree of steering, but pretty light touch actually, identifying what they think they need to develop as a project in terms of moving themselves from longer term inactivity successfully into employment and work, with some very, very strong evidence of success in an approach that's quite innovative. So it moves beyond again the traditional approach of doing things for and with job seekers and long-term unemployed people, by creating a space where long-term unemployed people can decide what they want to do themselves to reorientate their situation, which is absolutely fascinating. I'd like to particularly though ask Esther, from her perspective, her organisation works very, very closely with the employment services in Spain, and indeed the concept is now moving to some other countries. But I wonder if she could perhaps share some observations with us about how she thinks this wider ecosystem can work from the perspective of a third sector provider like her organisation. So what does an NGO need to do to make sure that the ecosystem can work for them and give them the opportunity to promote their programs for the benefit of job seekers? So thank you, Esther. Over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Well, Fundación Santa María la Real, first of all, I'm going to introduce the Fundación. It's a non-profit organization with recognized experience in designing and implementing innovative models, okay, especially focused on fostering employment and entrepreneurship. We work all over Spain and also in Italy and Portugal in collaboration with national partners. As you know, unemployment has been one of the main social problems in Spain. Now the unemployment rate is 16.3% and is expected to be risen to 70.5% during this year. But even before this current crisis caused by COVID pandemic, during the last 5 years of recovery, strong growth and job creation, there were some groups such as women, youth and long-term unemployed who were facing serious problems in accessing the labor market. So the systemic problem of the unemployment needs to be addressed by using new formulas and approaches, taking into account these new challenges we already discussed, the new changes of the society, the new demands of the labor market, the digitalization, and the new green policies and economy we can't forget about. Our CEO, Jose Maria Peridis, always says that today's problems can't be solved by applying the methods of the past, neither by our own. So that's our philosophy, and we design all our projects under a social innovation approach. Here is when we use this community approach that was also taken into the conversation, and all our projects are based in a public private collaboration, and we try to create synergies with the local, regionals, and national bodies, because we create in the co-responsibility of all bodies to change the main social problems. So as Eamonn already talked about, our best known and most impactful project is the Launching Path program, Lanzaderas is called in Spanish, for employment, which has changed the way of perceiving career guidance through a collaborative approach, and also works as a change of direction of the policies related to employability. The program has been implemented in all regions in Spain and in other countries, as I already mentioned. But what I mean, it's like we have implemented this program always in collaboration with the public administration, with regional, local, and municipalities, with the public employment services, always in collaboration, and the rate of the 50% of the participants were enrolled again in the labor market, either as a job placement or entrepreneurial activities, or re-entering the educational system. We also run other training and employment initiatives, programs such as social innovation expert course. We provide technical assistance to design and implement innovative employment projects and Lanzaderas methodology. And we, through our laboratory of employability, we do research and we identify new trends of the labor market and the new methodologies to provide a response to long-term unemployed people. And so to this question, to answer your question, we as a non-profit organization, we can offer complementary service to other partners or other bodies, or to the public employment services, because we can provide innovative projects, and we are flexible. We are organizations that are flexible. We can adapt very fast to the new demands of the labor markets, because we don't have like huge structures, and also we know very well the beneficiaries, so we can adapt to the needs of the job seekers. We are specialized in working with the most vulnerable groups, and we work very close to the civil society organizations and individual citizens. So we take into account and we involve them in the design and the process of the project, so they are part of the decision making of their own social integration. So this is very important, because this is what I think we can, this is the most added value we can offer. We work, Fundación Santa María la Real, we work with a huge variety of stakeholders, but we work at two main levels. We work at macro level. All our initiatives, as I said already, are based on co-responsibility of different social agents, which are involved in the social process. We establish alliances with central, regional, and local governments, municipalities, and regional public employment services, social services also. This only in one of the regions where we have a program for women victims of gender-based violence. So we have a specific program, and we work very close with the social services, because the case manager, they refer to our program the woman who wants to enroll or are able at that point to enroll the labor market. And And we have more than 1 million of agreements since we started our activity in 2013 with all these kind of stakeholders. For us, there is a strong link between our projects and the projects of these bodies, which they are implementing in all the territories. And we want to generate synergies to improve the coordination and the effectiveness, because we don't want to do any duplication. And it's always, we think it's better to coordinate the efforts and not to replicate the same services for the same beneficiaries. Then later we have a micro level collaboration. And this is more a local level, it's more project level, okay, because the project itself develops their own synergies and networks, because the participants of our programs, not only the launching pads, but other programs also, they are the main actors of their inclusion, social inclusions and change. So they also establish alliance with other non-profit organizations, private companies, the education sector. This also we do internally. So this is how, like, the stakeholders we collaborate with, but how we do collaborate. Now, what do we provide? We provide, as I said already, technical assistance training and counseling, upskilling and reskilling, digitalization assistance and training, even if we are not a specialized or technological company, because we are a non-profit, but we are not coming from there. But we do have this skill, let's say, because our programs have been evolving according to the changes of the demands of the market. Of course, digitalization was one of them, and most of our programs are nowadays 100% online. Actually, for example, during the COVID pandemic, we were assisting all the job seekers that were not assisted by the public employment service in Andalusia because of the lockdown. They didn't have the capacity, okay, to assist these job seekers online. So we were the ones assisting them and providing the service and responding to their needs online, because we were able to change or digitize the program in 2 months. Also, we do research and the identification of the new trends in the labor market. We did a project with the region of Castilla y León, Murcia, we did our research and which are the barriers or the problems the long-term unemployed people face when they try to re-enter the job market. So we did the research, and with the results, we created a methodology to work with the long and unemployed people, and we provide a technical assistance and a training to the workforce of the public employment services of these regions, so that they could provide a better service to the beneficiaries in these regards. So on the other hand, the public employment services, what they do, the collaboration, it's always, they are funding or co-funding our initiatives. They provide also rooms, venues, and spaces for implementing the projects, because we don't have these spaces. That's why also we collaborate very close to the public employment services. And yeah, basically this is mainly the collaboration we do, and because we also try to influence in the public policies with all the research we do, with the programs we have. For example, the program for the women victims of gender-based violence, senior launching path for those people older than 45 who are not in the labor market, and of course they have the capacity to re-enter the labor market, and the long-term unemployed people. So for us, basically, collaboration and alliances with public and private bodies is considered a strategic part of our initiatives. More than 50% of our projects have been developed by a mix of public and private funding. And also what we do in Spain is that we implement projects which are funded by the European Social Fund, for example, Launching Pad, in collaboration with the public employment services in Spain. So they also benefit, or they also are part of this initiative and results. And for sure, we have the same goals. We work on smart objectives. We join decision making. We share the commitment and the responsibility. And for us, this is our philosophy, and we can't run any initiative without the collaboration of different stakeholders, and of course the social employment services. And I don't know if I answered your question, or you have further questions, or you want me to explain about launching path more in deep.
That was perfect. Thank you much, Esther. That was a very, very helpful explanation of exactly why NGOs are a crucial part of the wider ecosystem. I think more information about launching pads people would find fascinating, and again, there's some interesting, I think, studies which people would perhaps be able to read outside the discussion, because it is a fascinating initiative and I really commend it to you. I think in terms of the particular issues there about the role of the NGOs, I think that last intervention from Esther was very nice, because there was some very pleasing symmetry with the comments right at the start of our discussion from Marius, actually, particularly along the point that one of the key roles of the partnerships with the other non-government organisations is particularly through providing specialist support, and indeed dealing with the terrible problems of gender-based violence and how to try and reintegrate somebody into the labour market after experiencing such terrible situations is a very good example, I think, of where the public employment service would not normally view itself as having that kind of expertise in-house, and clearly good links between the public sector and non-government experts there with that specialist support is a very good example of the ecosystem. I think also Esther mentioned how there's a lot about added value, and how individual NGOs can have a unique selling point and a particular kind of profile which can be attractive to public sector providers to work with them. Also, she mentioned several times the importance of identifying synergies to ensure that all the different people involved in the ecosystem, particularly NGOs, but perhaps for-profit organisations and others, can understand what they can all bring together, and how the whole can become bigger than the sum of the parts, which of course is a sign of a classically successful partnership. And this draws on the point of trying to avoid silos and duplication, a comment that Ania made during her response to the earlier question. So I'd like to thank you all very much for your very, very full and interesting responses to those comments.
Yeah,
I think for the final part of the discussion, I'll hand back to Miguel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for all your insightful inputs. I have a quick round of questions if you still have a bit of time. I'd like just to pick up on a few topics that that came up and that I find interesting also for further discussions. One is the aspect of co-creation that Eamonn was mentioning already in his introduction, and that you also mentioned. Co-creation in the sense, I think from my point of view, co-creation in partnerships and employment services will be one of the most future-proof aspects of how partnerships are developing and how successful they are. And co-creation, especially in the sense that how flexible is a partnership, and how much can the different parts be around the table and really take part in the design and in the delivery of specific programs. So coming back what Marius and Julian were saying in the beginning, I would like to ask either of the public employment services, Ireland or Austria, from your point of view, you mentioned that you have aspects of co-creation in your contracts, even where if providers or training institutes, contract partners suggest that something could be done differently, you try to accommodate it. But I would be interested to hear more in practice. How does that work? How do you accommodate ideas, co-creative aspects in the delivery of your services? Do you do that on a small scale, or is that really like implemented in the contract that allows like a pretty flexible and agile way of dealing with common delivery? So whoever wants to pick that up from the public side, I'll be happy to hear your comments. Yeah. Go ahead, Niall.
Yeah, I suppose it's different between the non-profit and the for-profit side. Strangely enough, on the non-profit side, it's we pay the on a cost met basis, so there's a very fixed budget, and there's a lot of control, financial control over it, and the services they provide are kind of very much specified. But on the for-profit ones, which is contracted kind of on a black box means, there's a lot more control ceded to them because we have metrics that measure outputs better. So I think it's the newer contract that has given us more flexibility, and I don't think it's necessarily because it's for profit or non-profit. It's because it's newer and we've been able to design it what we want from scratch. It's always easier to design something new. It's always easier to knock down a house and rebuild a new one than to restore an old one. Because you can design it exactly the way you want it. I think that's what we feel that the more recent contracts are. And I think COVID has really shown the flexibility and the ingenuity that they have been able to come up with, and they've surprised us with some of the products and some of the ways that they've been able to do things. Because when our employment services shut down, they shut down as one. So once we're in level 5 at the moment. So the state employment services, everything is just shut down. Referrals aren't happening, but you're allowed to communicate with the existing clients, and they've proven very good at that. They've showcased some new digital services that and they've been very innovative. So, you know, I mean, on the one hand, we want to see them do these things, but in the black box scenario, they're free to go out and do these things and use what they've learned in other markets and come back to us. I mean, we would be a very small market Europe-wide. You know, it's I think in 4 years, our contractors for the non-profit one would have done 260,000 clients. It's not a massive throughput, and that was at a time when we had 15% unemployment. Now it was down to 5 before COVID. So I mean, we do appreciate the kind of things they can do, and although it is a kind of traditional subcontracted model, the black box approach allows them to come up with innovative solutions. And sometimes it's after dialogue, sometimes it's after us issuing an instructions, and other times it's just off their own bat and said, listen, this is what we can do. And COVID was a good example of innovation in that regard. Some contractors then, you know, they just kind of look at COVID as more of a challenge than an opportunity. It depends on who you're dealing with, but in some ways we have been surprised at some of the things that have come up with, some of the solutions that come up with, and they have surprised us in a good way.
Thank you, Niall. Would you like to add from AMS?
Yes, I think you have to distinguish between different situations. For example, on the one hand, if you don't have a special crisis like the COVID crisis, then you have, I think, systematically instruments. On the one hand, we have, for example, these forms of dialogues between our partners or between also contractors to give us feedback in a systematic way. And normally we have also implemented, for example, a kind of monitoring and feedback system where we, but also our partners, see how the services, what's the quality of the services, what's the results of the services, and we have implemented that we have a feedback circle, you can say, in a form of a quality circle that you can plan, that you can adapt your, for example, the services. There's a contract, even the contract in a flexible way. For example, if you see that this services is not working the way it was intended, that you can then adapt when you see that the results are not exactly in the way you expected, for example. So you can implement some forms of cooperation where you have in a systematic way and also fixed in the contract that you have feedbacks, and then you can adapt your services or even adapt your contract on the one hand. Or in some cases also I think it's very clever to make it in a form of first having a pilot and then learning from the pilot, and from the pilot then you implementing in a broader scale, for example, on the experiences of the pilots. So there are some systematical forms you can implement innovation also, and flexibility. I think you have to differ this from a situation like in a crisis, where also we had to adapt in a very short time, and also our partners and providers, for example, of changing from face-to-face to online and things like that. In these situations, you have to be very flexible and say, okay, our contract was about face-to-face meetings, but then we switch over to online meetings and things like that. So it's necessary to have this flexibility in times of crisis, for example, that you can provide some services and to adapt to the new needs of a crisis, for example. And so I think in a structured form, on the one hand, systematically instruments about innovation, and systematically instruments how you can implement flexibility. On the other hand, really in crisis and in situations of crisis, to have flexible and not sticking to the exact word of a contract, and then you don't have to say no, and it's not fulfilled, for example, the contract, when it's not longer possible in a certain situation, then you have to have the flexibility. I think in these two directions, it's necessary to think to have the ability, for example, to adapt in a good and in a clever way.
Thank you very much. My next question goes to Ania, specifically from a private employment service point of view. Where do you see the future delivery model of employment services going? Now we're very much focused on digital, so there is a lot of discussion about dematerializing employment services, going away from face-to-face, also in the long term. At the same time, there's also a lot of discussion about that many cohorts, many client groups will not be able to cope with their digital skills levels. So there is hybrid models being brought into discussion. How would you see that? What's your vision for the future, how employment services will be delivered, and which role do partnerships play in this?
Thank you. I think that's a really important question, and of course very relevant in current circumstances. I think the answer is probably a blended model. We have seen certainly the sort of need for some of our job seekers to be able to, even if they don't come physically to the office, they know that the office is open. So, for example, during the whole period in Italy, apart from the strict lockdown where nobody was allowed to pretty much leave their home, our offices, physical offices were open. We had shifts for our case managers. We implemented all the safety measures just in case some of our job seekers who expressed the need to come were to come. Interestingly, we actually didn't see anyone coming to the office, regardless of what they have expressed. But a lot of them, I think, sort of the initial need to come to the office or expression of interest was from the fear of not being able to use the digital tools available. Some of our job seekers were very, comfortable using Teams. We had really successful job fairs, digital job fairs with employers and job seekers through Zoom, through the different meeting rooms that Zoom provides, and to a point that they were able to do digital video CV and send. But some other job seekers needed far more support in accessing it. So we started in some of the cases almost through a traditional telephone, guiding a job seeker to help them, set up a Zoom account or a Teams or whatever that tool was. I think the type of engagement that is offered is important. It's not just a structured workshops or training delivery, but we were, through our digital tools, offering what we call wellness sessions. So it's whether the job seeker just picks up a phone or asks us to phone them to have a conversation, to have a just chat on what's going on, and so on. So I think the need of a partnership here is particularly important because you know, we have our case managers, our employment experts, our employer engagement teams, but then there is a whole wealth of other organizations that can provide the additional support. There are organizations local to our offices in Varese, just outside Milan, that provide mental health support. So the coordination of services is really important, and their capacity also to provide those services in a digital way. A lot of organizations that we have worked with, regardless where, but most recently the experience from Italy is there were small, you know, kind of local shops set up. Not always the digital infrastructure was in place, but they were vital. They're vital services to support our job seekers. So to also help with their capacity, their capabilities to offer those services in a different manner, in a digital way, and we worked with them. Some of them were able to, you know, use some of our digital accounts or join our sessions and so on. So I think that sort of a closer cooperation, capacity building or capacity sharing is important in partnerships. But I think from the public agency perspective, I think the flexibility and sort of responsiveness is really important. When the pandemic struck, you know, everything went offline because the offices closed, and we went online because the offices closed. And for the first couple of weeks, we were really unable to get anything from our partners in the public sector because they were just trying to rearrange themselves and you know, move the delivery through the digital means. In some places, you know, they still haven't really grasped with the sort of a fully digitalized services. And then employers. You need to bring employers on the journey because these are the people who offer employment, who offer traineeship, apprenticeship, and all the wealth of other, you know, support that they can give. And actually, the feedback we had from employers was really positive because being able to access, you know, job for digitally means that they could do it from the comfort of their office or their home. They didn't need to schedule extra time to see the candidate, or they could see a number of them in a Zoom meeting. So I think there's a lot of things that will contribute to further improvement of the provisions. I think there was certainly a lot that will, dare I say, push the collaboration closer. But I think there's also a lot that needs to be done in building the capacity and capability of, well, both those who haven't had the funding in small organizations to do that, but also in a public sector. The sort of a modernization. Someone, I can't recall who of our colleagues here said about the fact that digital, I think the gentleman from Ireland, services or the infrastructure takes time, and it's only, you know, ability to tweak some of those. The digital infrastructure of some of the regions that we've seen in Italy is really outdated, and even the job seekers can't get through.
Okay, thank you very much. And my last question before I make a brief conclusion goes to the third sector, the NGOs, non-for-profit organizations. You're often the success factor of employment services because you're very close to the target groups. So you're brought in often when it's difficult to get to the target groups. You're already there, so things work then pretty quickly and on a smaller scale, but also very flexible. And however, you're not often heard, let's say, on the partnership governance level. Because you don't have as a strong voice as the private sector has and the public sector. So my question to you is, what you think could be done or should be done to make your voice heard more? Would it be, for example, organize yourselves more in associations or bring you to the table more often? What are your views on having you not only deliver, let's say, on the spot and on the local, regional level, but have more say in partnership negotiations? Both of you, whoever wants to start.
I can start, I don't mind. First of all, I think to be here, we need to use a common language, okay, that is attractive to everyone. And we need to do more partnership with the private sector because, as you said, they have the power, they have the fund, and they have more, more, let's say, power of action. So now we can, of course, use these tools about the Agenda 2030. They are all aligned with this, the private companies, the sustainable goals and everything. So we can, for example, we as an NGO, as a non-profit organization, we have a lot of contact and we approach and we have agreements with private companies, for example, now with Repsol. It's a well-known Repsol, and we will work on new jobs and new trends on the energy transition and which are the skills of the future for that. And of course, on this way, you can also, since you have a backup as a big company as Repsol or Telefónica as we have, we can also raise awareness about the problem of the job seekers and the problems other vulnerable groups have through them. So this is what I think we have to do, more collaboration with the private sectors, and we are on the way. I think this is the way.
Thank you very much. Wim, would you like to add something?
What we noticed and is still going on, but still early going on, is that in preparation of tender, the Flemish BES or even ESF try to get in dialogue. So I think, and then you have you can bring in the typics of what is really important for your region, because it differs even for a small country as Belgium. It differs if you are at the North Sea or you are in the Kempen, our region. Which is the target group? What do they need? What kind of regional expectations do you have, and what kind of expertise do you have also within the partnerships that they are already existing within the region? Partnerships of NGOs, partnerships NGOs, private, etc. So I will say, try to get a dialogue, and from that dialogue create a new tender in which you can tackle the LTU.
Thank you very much to all of you for your discussion readiness and your contributions. Just a few points I would like to highlight. Eamonn has been doing that throughout the discussion already, and I would just like to emphasize some of them. So we've been saying that partnerships, let's say I think we agree all that for active labor market policies, we all rely on cooperation and have been doing that already for a long time, especially when there is no capacity in the providing public service. So there is a certain inbuilt reliability towards partnerships, and that's a good thing. So on the management and governance level, we said, you said that there is a need for feedback, also structured feedback, need for co-creation in a systematic and long-term way. The tradition helps to do that. Where there is no tradition yet, it needs to be built with a quality awareness for building and sustaining partnerships. There needs to be eye level, which is one challenge that I heard here today. That is not always an eye level communication, so that's something to work on. It needs to be very clear in the set out what are the objectives, the policies behind it. That needs to be clear, as well as the design ideas need to be clear, and there needs to be certain flexibility in the delivery process. Forced partnerships that are not well prepared, don't help the delivery and end up in frustrating ways and bad examples. So targeting on the levels towards the customers is important within the partnerships, that there is a clear understanding of what target groups you're dealing with, especially when it comes with, let's say, traditional target groups for employment services of long-term unemployed, but also other vulnerable groups. There needs to be a positive approach towards it, positive narrative around working with vulnerable groups, also taking pride in it, approaching employers with a positive attitude, helping to remove barriers, but at the same time focusing on the positive sides and solving and removing the barriers. We talked about presence, visibility, social media presence, and the use of digital channels. In many areas needs to be updated, needs to be going with the time. We've seen some interesting examples, for example, the example of job carving, which is something where partnerships can work very well, where employers are helped to adjust their jobs to target groups. And we have seen another very interesting example of job seekers co-creating and having the co-responsibility to create their own employment career path instead of waiting for being suggested what to do. So these are just some of the conclusions that I heard. There were many more. We will be providing this video that we have been recording now to you, so you can have a look at it and take your points from there. We would like to share the video also with a wider audience. After you watch it, you can confirm to us that you will be okay with that. So to kick off a larger discussion on this topic, and also follow up with other events, which can be in this forum with other partners, maybe also employers at some point, more third sector providers and other actors. And maybe also interviews would be interesting to go more in deep about certain projects and present that to a wider audience. We would be also very happy if you emailed us after this event today and just gave us your feedback of what you like, whether you think this is a good way of promoting this and what you would do differently next time, what can be improved. So thanks for your time. We spent 2 hours together. You're all busy people, so that's appreciated. And we wish you a good day. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.